This interview is made possible by Catholic Charities of the Diocese of Arlington, which is funded in part by the Bishop's Lenten Appeal. We thank all who support this critical appeal and the ministries it funds. You're listening to Searching for More, a podcast of the Diocese of Arlington. On this episode, they risk persecution in their own country because they help our military overseas. Now these refugees are here. Find out what Catholic Charities is doing to resettle them. This episode's host is Billy Atwell, Chief Communications Officer for the Diocese.
Gregory, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Before we get into the real substance of the work of Catholic Charities and MRS, Migration and Refugee Services, tell us a little bit about yourself. You were just telling me that you're not Catholic, you're...
Well, I am Catholic, but I commune with the Melkite Greek Catholics. That's in one of the Eastern Catholic churches. It's historically from the Church of Antioch, and our Synod of Bishops and everything is in Antioch, and we're in the eparchy here. And I go to Holy Transfiguration in Tyson's Corner, that parish. It's a lovely place.
Is that connected to or have history connected with St. Ignatius of Antioch?
No.
Oh, okay. Because he's my patron saint, so I was curious.
Well, the historical lineage, yes, because he was a bishop in the Church of Antioch.
Right.
So, yes, Antioch is where Christians were first given that name, and according to the New Testament, and we've carried through ever since.
Very good. Very cool. So talk a little bit about the history of Migration and Refugee Services, that office and the work of Catholic Charities in that area.
Okay. So the diocese has had an effort to welcome the stranger, to resettle refugees from the 70s. I mean, at that point in time, it was a lot of the refugees from the Vietnam War. A formal program has been around since 1980, and we're effectively subcontractors of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They contract with the State Department for the funds to do resettlement, and we work then on the local level, and Catholic Charities agencies across the country do the same kind of work. There's 9 national organizations that do it. But the USCCB's efforts were actually the largest, and all the Catholic Charities agencies resettle about a quarter of the admissions every year in the United States.
Is this work that you left college and wanted to do, or how did you fall into this kind of work?
I left the private sector in 2007. Specifically, I got a master's in public administration to go into nonprofit work, and I actually studied the government program for refugee resettlement and fell in love with the idea and the work that was done, and Catholic Charities was always a leader in that, so I wound up here in 2016.
Very good, very cool. So talk about some of the people that we resettle. What are some of the types of groups? Where are they coming from? What are their backstories, and what have they experienced that led them to be a refugee to the United States?
Okay. The traditional refugee, the international definition of refugee, is someone that's crossed an international border and they're fleeing persecution on the basis of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. They have to be formally approved in that status by the UN Commissioner for Refugees. And then they might be eligible for resettlement after a long period in a third country because they can't go back home. They go back home at the fear of their life. Sometimes they just get to leave with the clothes on their back.
Right.
But that is relatively a small part of the groups that we're resettling right now. For the last few years, we've been resettling mostly first Iraqis and now Afghans that served with the coalition forces in the war zones overseas. And they come into the country in what's called a special immigrant visa, so they're called SIVs.
So you said they served with the coalition. What does that mean? What kind of work were they doing? So they were helping the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yes. Combat translators, scouts. They built roads in the rural areas, schools. They served as security guards in the embassy staff.
Wow.
And they have to demonstrate that as a result of their service that their lives and livelihood is at risk overseas. And if they prove that, and again, even though they had security clearances overseas and things to operate in those theaters, it still takes them about over 2 years to get through the process to be admitted into the United States. They have to be vetted all over again.
So they would become refugees, I'm going to assume, you tell me if I'm right, because they would, for doing that work, for assisting the U.S., they would be literally in the crosshairs of Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or some terrorist group or something like that. Is that what makes them refugees?
Yes.
Wow.
That's the point. There's an element of they were seen as collaborators.
Yeah.
And that puts their lives and their families' lives at risk.
Is typically the whole family able to come over at once? Do they end up having to kind of go in groups? Because they're vetting each person, I presume.
Well, that's one reason it takes so long, because they do bring the entire family over in most cases. That's almost every case we receive the entire family.
Are they English speaking for the most part?
The men, yes, because they had to have a certain degree of English, again, in most cases, to serve with the armed forces. There are some, the ones that served in the scouts in the rural areas that spoke more of the tribal languages. They might come with no English at all, and one of the first things we have to do is enroll them in ESL classes.
So they declare or seek refugee status while they're in their home country of Afghanistan, Iraq. They get here. What are their first needs, or what is the process you all take them through once they arrive? So they arrive on our doorstep, so to speak. What's next?
We pick them up at the airport, and sometimes we even have volunteers come from the parishes to go along with our greeting party at the airport. It depends. They do have to have a connection, immediate family member or a friend that worked with them overseas to be able to be admitted into Virginia. So there has to be a local contact. But depending on that, then we may help them set up households, find apartments for them, furniture, pots and pans, buy the first round of groceries, enroll the kids in school, take them for their second round of medical screenings and vaccinations and things that they didn't receive overseas. So we really do, there's a 90-day period that's a comprehensive resettlement effort that goes on.
And then what kind of jobs do they end up getting once they're kind of settled in? I know that's a big part of it, is kind of getting to self-sufficiency. So what type of work do they typically start off doing?
It's tough because when they arrive here, a lot of them are very highly skilled people. I mean, we have civil engineers, we have electrical engineers, we have attorneys, we're serving overseas, a lot of professional backgrounds, but they almost have to start over here.
Yeah.
And the first jobs that they get, I call them quick connect jobs, and it's tough for them to make ends meet. But we encourage everybody in the family to work. The goal is self-sufficiency. And the big challenge then is to help them get back into their professional fields, which is why the state of Virginia has programs and provides fundings that lets us work for unemployment purposes for up to 5 years. 5 years is that mark when they go in to be eligible for citizenship. After arrival. So we can work with the kids in school enrichment programs for 5 years. We can work with the seniors over 60 that come in. Then we have a kind of a holistic case management for them, again, for 5 years. So we work with folks really trying to help them get back in their fields and really get set up beyond just that 90-day survival.
I remember when I was over at your building and I saw some of the supplies in this big closet that people had donated, and I saw crib sheets. And I thought to myself, because I have little ones at home, I thought to myself how scary it would be to show up not just in a strange land, but not even have crib sheets. I mean, that's something that we change regularly. Kids are messy. And to think that they didn't even have that. Emotionally, what are they carrying when they come? Because obviously physically they have these needs, so there's a process for all that. Emotionally, though, they're fleeing violence or persecution, fear that their families could be killed. And for 2 years they've gone through that process and that fear. Then they get here with very little. Like you said, sometimes the clothes on their back. Emotionally, what are they going through when they arrive?
It's a real mixed bag of emotions.
Yeah.
There's relief on the one hand, and kind of the scary anticipation on the other hand, but then there's also culture shock. So there are stages that that we're aware that most most of our clients are going to go through in one way or another. So that's another reason that we are able to get to know them. Over time, we try to make those connections. If we see that they need services beyond what we offer in-house, we can refer them on for counseling, whether it's within Catholic Charities or with other agencies. We partner with a number of organizations. So we only have resources to do a certain number of resources. That's what we contract to do, but we always try to provide meaningful services beyond those things, and that's really where the support from the parishes that we've been so blessed to get really comes into play.
I want to ask about that next, but before we go there, how many people a year typically are you all helping, refugees specifically?
Last fiscal year, we went on the federal fiscal year, we resettled about 660 individuals.
Wow.
We were contracted again for 600 this year, but the arrivals are very much off nationally, and we will not hit that 600 unless there's a real surge in the last quarter of the fiscal year.
So 600 people, how many families? Is it like 200, 300?
Well, it depends, because we get single individuals and we get families of 10.
Yeah.
We just got a family of 7 yesterday.
Wow.
So, about 200, 250 families, and it just kind of works out.
How is the relationship in working with the government on this? Obviously, they're doing the vetting and the screening of folks, and that's what takes 2 years. But what is the relationship between the agencies like MRS and the government like? Is that a real partnership in a sense, or how is it viewed between us and them?
It's typically been a partnership. As I said, the USCCB is the one that contracts on the national level for that 90-day period of first resettlement. And then there are also programs through the state of Virginia that are those longer-term 5 years employment and child enrichment, such as those. We have wonderful relationships with, we were just in Virginia yesterday for our annual meeting with the Office of Newcomer Services in Richmond, had a very cordial meeting, and they recognize the work that we're doing. And there are by the way, 2 other resettlement agencies in Northern Virginia, Lutheran Social Services and the Ethiopian Development Council, and so we work in partnership with them as well. So everything really is client-centered and client-first.
I don't want to brag, but we're the best, right?
Of course.
No, I'm just kidding. So you mentioned parishes. What is the relationship or the partnership that MRS, Migration and Refugee Services, has with the parishes? How do they get involved in this program?
Parishes have been working with us for years. Last fiscal year, the most notable thing that the majority of parishes get involved in is the Giving Tree program, the Advent donation drive. And last year we had 15 parishes, and that generated over $43,000 worth of donations.
Wow.
So some of it's gift cards. It's always very helpful. It gives us the flexibility. But I mean, pot and pan sets, the crib sheet sets, the pack and plays, for the kids, and that's a phenomenal program. And I can't go through the list. Don't have enough time here to go through the list and thank everybody for that. And then there are some parishes that work with us on an ongoing basis. St. Agnes in Arlington, for instance, and I'm going to mention this, St. Mary's of the Immaculate Conception in Fredericksburg, we have our Student Achievement Banquet in June, and they hosted both of those banquets, or provided support, provided volunteers, provided desserts. It was actually on the grounds of the school at St. Mary's in Fredericksburg. So that's where the clients, the students and their families come together with the volunteers, and we have a fun evening. There's awards, there's student recognition. It's the end of the end of year blowout. It's all decorated. It's a wonderful event, and they supported those. We have some of our training programs at St. Agnes. The cultural orientation when they initially arrive, and then employment training sessions, and they provide Virtus-trained childcare right next door to the conference room, so everybody can focus. The mom and dad can both be there and focus on what the information we're conveying to them.
That's beautiful. So are the items that people donate, if they're donating goods, do they all need to be new, like pots and pans, for instance, those kinds of things? Does it all need to be new, or can some of it be used? How does that work? We
must provide new bedding. So
that makes sense.
Mattresses, sheets, the bed things like that, that's a contractual requirement. We can take used items, typically the couches, dressers, things like that. So that's common. But new pots and pans, those things are great. Sometimes we get used things and we have to actually sort them, and that can be a problem just for capacity.
Yeah. So if people wanted to donate goods, obviously, I would assume cash or gift cards, again, it affords you the most flexibility. You can apply it to the greatest need.
Yes.
But if people do have things that they wanted to donate, or if they saw a great deal on home items that they thought might be useful, who do they contact, or where do they go to provide those, to donate them?
There's the ccda.net website has the link to Migration and Refugee Services and the phone numbers there.
So ccda.net, and they can find all that information out about where to bring those things.
And as well as being able to sign up as a volunteer, because we have a lot of opportunities for individuals and parish groups to work directly with employment coaches, resume development, ESL tutors, in-home tutors, homework buddies. There's all kinds of opportunities to make a personal contact with our clients. So
I would imagine on the so we have Catholic Charities is the Corporal Works of Mercy, the Diocese of the Spiritual Works of Mercy. Obviously, they're all under the one head of our bishop, but I always think of catechists. We always have a hard time recruiting catechists because they feel like I'm not qualified to do it. I'm not a theologian or anything. I would imagine sometimes there's a barrier for people because they feel like, well, I'm not qualified to be a coach in this capacity or that capacity. But I would assume a lot of people have gifts that they don't appreciate as much that could be of great value to you all.
We can provide training and materials. For instance, if you wanted to be an in-home tutor or a conversation partner, we can set up the books, the materials. But really, even beyond that, it's just the ability to make a personal connection.
Yeah.
That's really what's important there. And to make somebody else feel comfortable, to help them adjust to their new culture, their new situation. One of the anxieties is they're separated from their home and family and everything they knew back home, and they're even worrying about the relatives that they left behind.
Oh, yeah.
I was in it worked out in the end, but I was in the overhearing a phone call between a client and one of our staff members. Their family, they were trying to get a running lead on the family member that was behind in the village that was being hunted down at that moment in time by a terrorist group looking at the collaborators.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Now, you had mentioned parishes, which makes me think about, so the parishes are assisting refugees. Parishes are also helping a lot of people who are immigrants to this country. Could you define for folks the difference between immigrant and refugee? Because in the political discourse, I feel like it is often grouped into just one big group. They're not differentiating well enough the difference between these two groups, and Catholic Charities does serve both. So if you could just, for folks that are new to the issue, maybe if you could describe the difference between refugee and immigrant.
Refugees are an internationally recognized and defined status. Mm-hmm. So again, crossed an international border, can't go back home for fear. A migrant has a choice. A migrant usually is looking for a better life or trying to rejoin family members overseas or things like that, and they can go back home whenever they want to. Refugees don't have that option. If they do have to go back home for some reason, their lives are in danger. And that's actually an international commitment not to return someone forcibly to a dangerous situation. So refugees are specific legal status, as are asylees. So we can work someone that's arrived in this country and claimed asylum. Once they're fully approved by the immigration court, once they have that final approval, we can also work with them. We can also work with people that have the specific definition of victims of human trafficking. And there are some other protected categories that we can work with as well. And then, of course, the SIV, that special immigrant visa, that the ones that served in the war zone, that's a separate designation and a separate number of available slots for them to come in as opposed to the other categories.
That's so fascinating, especially the group that helped us overseas. It's wonderful that we're able to resettle them here and give them that safety that they deserve. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about your program?
The definitions, really, and thank you for providing an opportunity to do that. The definitions of the statuses and who we actually serve is a big element of confusion. A lot of the images or the word refugee has been come into the public discourse because of the media documenting the inflows into Europe. Well, that's a different story here. If you're admitted as a refugee, you have that vetting process overseas that's very rigorous, 20 stages, multiple interviews over, like I said, 2 to 3 year period before you're allowed to be resettled. So the specific definitions is a big element of confusion. And again, we work with people that it's impossible for them to go back home and live.
They've got nowhere else.
They literally have nowhere else to go, and sometimes a refugee would go to a third party. For instance, there are Syrians, many Syrians living in Lebanon, for instance. Syrians are not permitted into the country right now. They're being housed in the countries around there,
right.
But they're tolerated, but not much else.
But not welcome.
No.
What is the response from the refugees that we take in to the welcome that they're receiving? So these are, most of the folks you're taking, I'm assuming, are not Christians and in most cases not Catholics too. So for these folks that come to a foreign country and they're received by the church and cared for and given assistance and housing and opportunities and maybe like you said, these volunteers, I would imagine that is not only a relief, but just a sense of gratitude for that, because they're not going to receive that in other countries. Like you said, not every country is going to receive them the way we have.
That's very important aspect of our interaction with the clients. In fact, on World Refugee Day last month, June 20th, we had our staff and other people from the diocese staff went around to our clients' homes and dropped off food boxes and gifts, and they were royally received.
Yeah.
Very, very hospitable people, very open, very warm, and they do appreciate the work that we do for them. It's not perfect. We push them towards self-sufficiency. We wish we could do more sometimes. They wish we could do more sometimes, but at the end of the day, we want our volunteers to help teach them, help train them, help make them feel comfortable, help make them feel integrated and on that path toward eventual citizenship that they deserve from their service.
So if you want to learn more about Migration and Refugee Services, go to ccda.net. You can find a link there. Greg, is there any other thoughts or any other stories you wanted to share before we sign off here?
I just wanted to mention 2 outreaches we have going on right now. The USCCB gave us a grant under the Parishes Organized to Welcome Refugees. So we're actually out among the parishes and the diocese trying to do educational events and set up meet and greet events, and we can provide more information on that. There's also a broader community initiative that meets several times a year with crossing faith communities, social service, law enforcement. The whole Northern Virginia community can come and get information about the work that we do and the incoming refugees, the Virginia Community Capacity Initiative, and we're very pleased with the work that's going and how this kind of message and information and right information is getting out into the community. So both of those are open for individuals from the parishes or groups to participate in.
Wonderful. Gregory, thank you for the work that you do. I mean, I can only imagine how relieving it is for these families that come from these situations and these places to be met by someone like you who's, ready to bring them in and to care for them. I'm sure that it's just a huge relief to them, and it's a wonderful extension of the mercy of God and the mercy of the church. Thank you.
Thank you very much. God is good.
Thank you for listening to Searching for More. If you enjoyed this podcast, please write a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Also, make sure you follow the Diocese and the Arlington Catholic Herald on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And subscribe to our YouTube channels for regular videos that will inspire, educate, and inform you about the Catholic faith and our diocesan community.